and you're not working with OT on a pretty regular, consistent basis on what that tool's uncovering, expanding its visibility, reaching out into that entire plant to try to gain as much asset inventory to determine vulnerability and risk, what remote access is going on in there, you are missing the boat. But you as the CISO are going to get hung out to dry. The third-party vendor that they got in there, they're not the ones that made the news. The global beverage manufacturer made the news.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Let's talk about the two global dairy producers that had breaches for third-party vendors. How's that? I think that's timely. I think it's on topic. It's something that we've addressed. We've tried to communicate how third-party risk is a large part of an organization's strategy. What are they doing? How are they looking at it? What are some things they can do? Some takeaways? Let's just dive right into it.
Yeah. So let's frame it up. So what do we mean by remote access, right? Everybody it's like cybersecurity, right? It's a big damn word. So remote access into manufacturing environments. There are multiple remote access methodologies and technologies typically deployed just in a single plant, right? And that remote access is there for a wide range of reasons, one of which is support, remote support, whether it be the client's internal teams or their external vendors. There's also information that they try to pull out of those machine centers for maintenance purposes, to be more proactive and predictive in their maintenance activities. And the thing is a lot of these plants have cobbled together some remote access that was either installed by the plant, not necessarily by IT. Sometimes, many times, it's your system integrator or your OEM has put something in there so that, they're being asked to support the plant. And so they'll put something in there also. We've seen the Cradle Point cellular modems. We've seen Sycomias and E1s and Tosi boxes, all the things that you shouldn't be using on your plant floor, right? Because if you're still using network-based network access, right? MAC IP and not applicational level, you're not really moving the needle forward to improving your cybersecurity posture in your manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, well, especially with all of the available options today that are top tier, OT centric, that bring best in class from an IT perspective, built on OT protocols and standards that allow for access safely into the OT environment. There's not an excuse any longer. The excuses are done. I've had all of my one.
Yeah, and there's uniqueness to those industrial protocols that aren't standard IT protocols, that you have to punch holes in your firewall in order to let them gain access to those machine centers running those, sometimes in many cases, proprietary control system applications, right? And the client can do a really good job of trying to improve their cybersecurity. In most cases, IT is unaware of a lot of this stuff that's out there because it's not in their purview. It's not the responsibility of those assets to even know when those machines were built or put in there is one. But then the fact that they're connected to your network, you have no idea what that third-party network security looks like on that side, what their cybersecurity posture is, which is what happened to one of them, right? The bad actor was able to go through the third party who doesn't have good cybersecurity practices and was able to come down into one of these large global beverage manufacturers and come right into their plant. And once they land in there, again, if you're just using a VPN, now they got free reign inside your manufacturing environment in most cases.
Well, I think that same global beverage manufacturer announced that their dairy products would halt production for the foreseeable future. Don't know if that's several hours, several days. It's going to depend while they address this breach, if you want to call it. Yeah.
If you don't have visibility into those OT applications and systems, those control systems, then you don't know how far the breach has gone, right? IT can usually do a pretty good job of finding out what's been infected on their side because they've got a lot of that technology in place. Manufacturing doesn't. Even if you've bought one of these top tier OT intrusion detection systems, Clarity and the Zomi, Cisco Cybervision, Adragos, for example, if you may not have the full visibility. And we see that a lot, right? If you only have one collector or sensor in that plant, and that's not enough. You might be seeing 20, 30% of your assets, and that's about it if you're lucky.
You get organizations that take separate views. Some are, we are important, we want to see the north-south traffic. That's important to us. And others are, we want to see it all. We want to see that east-west. We want to see that lower control layer traffic, which is significantly more difficult to get to, more expensive, and more time consuming, but it's valuable down on those lower level networks. You can't rely just on the north-south traffic that hits a firewall to protect you.
But it's not a technical issue. This is a people, right? I mean, we still see OT organizations that do their darndest to keep IT out of these very critical machine systems, machine controls, right? They do their damnedest to keep them out because whatever reason, whether it's history, they don't have a great understanding of how this operates in this environment. And so they don't want them meddling in there. Even if you think that you're well aligned, it doesn't necessarily mean that OT wants anybody meddling in their particular world, right? Safety reasons, environmental reasons, product integrity, quality, a whole bevy of reasons why they don't want them in there. Which is why I always say the OT industry has to get better at this game, right?
They do. We're finishing up an analysis for a client, and one of the common themes was there has been an inherent distrust of IT in the environment over the past several years, and now they are intentionally blocking IT from the network. Don't know what speared it, don't know what it's going to take to fix it, but at this point, that is a cultural issue. That is not easily resolved.
Again, it's not a technical issue, right? I've seen the same thing in an automotive manufacturer just last month, same thing, right? Failed an audit. The CISO's doing is working his hardest to try to get the asset inventory that was required out of that audit, and he's running into a brick wall with the OT guys.
Back to my very famous statement, responsibility versus authority. And I would say most CISOs have the responsibility, but very, very few have the authority to go in and affect change. That has to change, period.
Yeah. And if you are a CISO or a CIO or an InfoSec leader, I would implore you to try to find out who are the top integrators that are working in your manufacturing plants today, your OEMs and your system integrators that your plants rely on, the people that those OT people do trust, right? The ones they spend millions of dollars with to help them keep those plants running, buying equipment, buying software, installing networks, all this technology, the integration that's going on in that plant. You're going to have to make some new friends if you want to get past Craig's statement of you have the responsibility, but you don't have the authority. But at the same time, you're not tapping into probably one of the top that are working in your plants today.
Well, so my question, if we look back and ask a very hard question of the two global organizations that just got popped in the last
48 hours, 72 hours.
Since Monday. So if you look at those, how many of them in their incident response plan and procedures, you have a CIO or a CISO calling the number one system integrator to ask them, hey, can my plant operate safely in this environment, or what recommendation do you have so that my people are safe if we continue to produce, or do we have to just close?
Colonial Pipeline, was one of the originals, back 5, 6, 7 years ago, however long it's been now, was a classic example of that. And it still happens today. Every day. This is not unique to what happened to these beverage companies in the last 48 or so hours. And they've got the tools. Both of these companies I know have these intrusion detection systems.
But again, what's their philosophy? Is it just north-south? Is it we want to see everything? Are there cradle point cellular modems that they are not aware of in their environment that the tools are not picking up on? There are so many questions that we don't know and that probably won't be available to the public. But at the end of the day, the technology is there. This is a people concern.
Yep. Yeah, and some of it's budget related, right? Where, IT, who should pay for this? At the end of the day, who's going to pay for it, right?
I'm tired of hearing it's a budget issue, because if I go and I look at a K1, or if I look at a SEC filing for quarterly or annual, these organizations are doing record business with record earnings. It's not a budget. There is funding available if they prioritize and choose to use it.
Yeah. But, but the money that they're losing because of the breach is costing them millions of dollars a day. Instead of investing something that pays dividends, if you were to put a technology in place where you have full scope and visibility of your manufacturing environment from a cybersecurity perspective, to know that whatever breach that you got, to know exactly where it is, to your point of being able to continue to operate, doesn't cost near as much as the millions of dollars you're losing every day because you're down.
But that analysis was run. If I were to ask both organizations last week, hey, what would it cost you if you were down? They're like, we're not going to, it's not going to happen to us. We're fine. And somebody said our cost to do preventative was X. Let's pick $1,000. Well, our cost of Y, and after breach incident to repair, downtime, reputational brand damage, everything is going to be $100,000. It's a minimum of 100x almost. So it's not a fair comparison, but it's a mathematical game. Same as insurance. I got friends that refuse to buy insurance on their car because I'm a safe driver, it won't happen. And when they get in an accident, then what are they doing? They're buying a new car.
Yeah. And back to, doing this, the people that pull back and would say, I don't need to track the east-west traffic in order to build an asset inventory to determine what my vulnerabilities and risks down there and to continuously threat monitor. That's one opinion. Right. And it's like, why does that person's opinion outweigh the entire organization? Right. And or the OT guy just as guilty who's saying, why do we need these cybersecurity technologies in my air-gapped environment, right? Or it's not connected to anything, meaning that just because your PLC is sitting in both worlds, you think that's your firewall is your PLC. That's going to protect you, right? So it's definitely, a conversation. And it's not being had, at a level of what I call getting all the liars in the same room and going through one of these exercises, right? And have somebody in there that actually understands both worlds to determine where your gaps are. Why is it okay for you only to have visibility? You either have none because you're still navel gazing, you haven't even started, or you put a tool in and you're only seeing 25% of your assets in your plant. And you're missing out on 75. Why is that okay? I think it goes back to money, my honest opinion, because IT got money to buy the tool, deployed it best they could with whatever capabilities and influence they were able to send in that plant. And then at that point, when it comes to the other side of the fence, not knowing you need to spend another several hundred grand maybe to be able to outfit that plant with the things that you need in order to get 100% visibility in there.
Well, so if we take a half step back, and we look at maybe some practical exercise that a client could do, whether that's vendor audits, that's incident resource planning, response planning, it's segmentation. What would be some guidelines or recommendations or at let's call it table stakes that organizations need to do or to ask or to figure out to at least start protecting themselves?
You take these large beverage companies that just recently got hit, and knowing that their global footprint, the number of plants they have, you have hundreds of people working in your manufacturing environments that are not part of your organization. They're not internal. They're external. And again, going back to incident response plan, we do a lot of proposals and we win a lot of jobs. There's never an IR plan discussion on what would happen if we were in the middle of what happened to them on Monday. If you've got this breach going on and we've got 4 projects going across 5-year plants, right? What's the IR plan? Because you're not sharing it with the system integrators. And if I was to ask that and put it in my proposal, what is your IR plan? What should we do? What's the roles and responsibilities if you have a material breach while we're working on site? What are the steps?
Well, we should look at it from a one step removed and say, if this happens, how are you going to reimburse me for liability on all of my laptops or all of my assets that are connected to your network when it was breached?
Well, and we have that in our proposal, right? For things that are beyond our control that keep us from continuing to move forward for whatever reason, at some point financially, we get compensated for that, right? If we have to stay put for a month while you're trying to remediate and mitigate and then try to re-engage us, there's a cost associated with that. And it's built into our proposals, into the contract. So we do have those types of scenarios where, again, it's just more money you're losing.
But you look, we run the risk of if we're there and we have a laptop plugged in doing some remediation or some work and that laptop's infected and it accidentally gets brought back to our office, again, we are potentially at harm as well for their environment.
Well, and our corporate IT people have their safeguards, with their EDR packages that we have on these machines, the things that not to get on the plant network, use the Wi-Fi network, try to be as light as touch as possible while you're on site. But that's not always the case. It depends on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. But these third-party vendor breaches are widespread because you got a lot of mom and pop integrators out there that just do not have the sophistication. They're really good at a filler or a pasteurizer or a palletizer or some mixing and blending vessels as far as the control aspect of it, but they're not your top-notch, cybersecurity firms, right? Or networking firms. That's not them. They're just really good at building skids and machine centers and programming and integrating that equipment, right? That's not their forte. And that's the kind of stuff these CISOs and CIOs, these organizations need to flush out. There are those of us in the space that are, and then there are those that are not. And you're not working with OT on a pretty regular, consistent basis on what that tool's uncovering, expanding its visibility, reaching out into that entire plant to try to gain as much asset inventory to determine vulnerability and risk, what remote access is going on in there. You are missing the boat. But you as the CISO are going to get hung out to dry, to your point, the third party vendor that they got in there, they're not the ones that made the news. The global beverage manufacturer made the news.
That was my point I was getting ready to make, is in neither of these, you didn't hear third-party company X breached one of these global manufacturers. You saw their headline splashed across the 5 o'clock news that said ransomware, breach, whatever the title was for these two large global manufacturers. That is brand deterioration.
One of them had to file with the SEC, right? Right. And if you're an American company and you're publicly traded, you got to tell the SEC, right? Yep. So, I mean, that's part of the game, right? To the extent of, and that's how you end up in the news. So, and you may say, is it harming your reputation, your brand? I don't know. These companies are pretty big and they may survive some of that, but they are going to take a hit on downtime.
They will survive, but you can't go back in the Wayback Machine to get your time back.
Right. And I don't think somebody's not going to buy their product because that happened. But you might have investors that might decide, you know what, I'm going to sell that stock because they're they're not operating at the level that I thought they should be operating at to secure and protect my investment.
Both of them did make public statements that said the integrity and safety of the products, even though we're experiencing a downtime, is not compromised. So at least there was no recall. There was no integrity on what they had already made, but they can't make anything.
I mean, that's a lot of people that you're paying and utilities that you're paying and product that you're getting rid of and trucks that are waiting and taxes that you're paying and
It's a distraction, Dino.
all the things that just rack and roll it up. If you're $1 billion a year operating revenue plant and you've lost a week's worth of running time, do the math.
It's a distraction from operations, and it takes time away from what they are super skilled at doing, and that's making product.
And even all the professionals you bring to the table, both internally and externally, you're still not bringing the OT folks to the table to help solve this problem.
Agreed. Yep, totally agreed.
Because if you were, we would know because our phones would ring because we're operating in these plants that we're talking about.
Yeah, true statement. I think that was hopefully organizations learn from this. Hopefully they can take something back to their leadership, to their teams, and say, hey, how are we addressing this? Who are our vendors? What is their access into our facilities? How are we managing that? Do we have one program? Is it 15 programs? Is it different for every plant and we have 30 plants? So organizations, you have to start asking the tough questions. This can't be a check the box anymore. It's not going to go away.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.